Hello students, let us study about the cerebrum in this lecture. So what is cerebrum? Cerebrum is the front portion of the brain. So cerebrum is a very important region of the brain and it occupies a large area of the brain. So what are the other regions of the of the brain? The other regions of the brain apart from cerebrum is the cerebellum, diencephalon and the brain stem. So these are the different regions of the brain. So today we are going to study about the cerebrum. Cerebrum, as you can see, it is the seat of intelligence. So it is a very, very important part of the brain and it is called as the seat of intelligence. So from the name, you can understand that it provides with the ability to read, write, and to speak. So it will make calculations and compose music, and it will also help us to remember the past, plan for the future, and imagine things that has never existed before. So the imaginary power, and the how you remember the things which has happened even in a very early age of life, everything is because of the cerebrum. It consists of an outer cerebral cortex and internal region of cerebral white matter and gray matter nuclei deep within the white matter. So, unlike the spinal cord, the gray matter is outside, the white matter is inside. Inside the white matter, you have the gray matter nuclei, which is present deep within the white matter, which are very important centers for the cerebrum. What is cerebral cortex? Cerebral cortex, has the name you can understand, like cortex is the outer region or the bark. Cortex ring or bark, it is a gray region. It is made up of gray matter which forms the outer rim, outer portion of the cerebrum. So it is only 2 to 4 millimeter in thickness, and but it contains around many billions of neurons. The cerebral cortex, though it is very thin, that is 2 to 4 millimeter in thickness, it contains billions of neurons. During embryonic development, when the brain size increases rapidly, the gray matter of the cortex enlarges faster than the deeper white matter. So, along with the growth of the head and the body, the brain size also increases very rapidly in the embryonic stage. The cortical region rolls. So because of the rapid development, it rolls and forms many folds. This folding of the upper part, that is the cortex region of the cerebrum, is called as the gyri or singular gyrus or convolutions. So these convolutions, the upper outer region, which rolls into many folding, called as the gyri, which many grooves in between the gyri, there are grooves. You can say a fissure or a sulcus or a grooves. So on the top of the grooves, you can call it as a pallam made, just like that. So you can see the made is called as the gyri and the pallam is called as the sulcus or sulci. The deepest groove, so the grooves, as I told you, the grooves in between the foldings are called as fissures. So the grooves are called as the fissures. There may be some shallow grooves and there will be some deeper grooves. So the deepest grooves between the folds are called as fissures. So these are the deepest grooves which will separate the different regions of the brain. The shallow or smaller grooves are between the folds are called as the sulci, singular sulcus. So you all know longitudinal fissure is the most prominent fissure or the deepest groove which separates the cerebrum, that is the right and left half of the cerebral hemisphere. And we have studied the falx cerebri is one of the is called as the longitudinal fissure which is present between the two cerebral hemisphere, or which separates the cerebrum into two cerebral hemispheres. So the cerebral hemisphere are connected internally. Both the hemispheres are internally connected by a very important region called as the corpus callosum. It is a hard body. Corpus callosum means hard body. It is a broad band of white matter containing axons which extend between the hemisphere, and they connect both the right and the left hemispheres together. So here in this picture, you can see the cerebrum, different regions of the cerebrum. The posterior, this is the superior view, and this is the right lateral view, superior view and the right lateral view. Here you can see this is the anterior region and this is the posterior region. So you can see this is the deepest fissure called as the longitudinal fissure, and these are the two cerebral hemispheres. This is the frontal lobe. This is another fissure called as the central sulcus. This central sulcus divides the cerebrum, that is the frontal lobe, from the parietal lobe. So this blue colored one is the parietal lobe. This is the occipital lobe, and you can see there is a gyrus. This is the above and below the central sulcus, which is the fissure. The region is called as the gyrus. This is the pre-central gyrus, and this is the post-central gyrus. So the major fissures are a longitudinal fissure which separates the right and the left hemisphere, and the central sulcus which separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So the upper portion of the gyrus, upper portion of the central sulcus is called as the precentral gyrus, and the lower portion, lower gyrus of the central sulcus is called as the post-central gyrus. So this is a view of the small portion of this region. You can see here, this is the gyrus, which is the deepest fissure, and this is the sulcus, that is a shallow fissure, and the folded region, upper folded region is called as the gyrus. So you can see the cerebral cortex, you can see the gray matter. So this is the gray matter, you can see. This is the cortex, and inside you can see the white matter, cerebral white matter, and this is the cerebral cortex, which is made up of gray matter. So these are the deepest fissure. Here you can see the right lateral view. So right lateral view is seen here, and you can see again the this is the central sulcus which divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, and this is the one which is above the central sulcus is called as the precentral gyrus, and the gyrus which is below the central sulcus is called as the post-central gyrus. And you can see the different lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, parieto-occipital sulcus which divides the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe. This is the transverse fissure which divides the cerebrum from the cerebellum, and this is the temporal lobe. This is the lateral central sulcus which divides the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe. So these are insula. This is a projected to the surface. This is another region called as insula. Now let us study about the lobes of the cerebrum. Each cerebral hemisphere is further divided into four lobes. So they are named after the bones that cover them. I think we have studied about this when you studied about the bones of the cranium, cranial bones. So I hope you recollect frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes, and they are separated by many sulcus or fissures. The central sulcus, as we have seen in the picture, separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So keep in mind, central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. There is a major gyrus, the precentral gyrus, that is the covered portion, that not the fissure, it is the made, that is no this portion, the precentral gyrus, located immediately anterior to the central sulcus. So this precentral gyrus contain primary motor areas of the cerebral cortex. There is another gyrus which is below the central sulcus called as the post-central sulcus. It contains the primary somatosensory areas of the cerebral cortex. So the precentral gyrus contains the primary motor area, and the post-central gyrus contains the primary somatosensory area of the cerebral cortex. There is another fissure, the deepest one, called as the lateral cerebral sulcus. So this separates the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe. There is another sulcus called as the parieto-occipital sulcus, which separates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. From the name itself, you can understand. A fifth part of the cerebrum, we have seen the insula. So it cannot be seen from the surface of the brain because it lies within the lateral cerebral sulcus, very much deep to the parietal, frontal, and the temporal lobes. So these are the different lobes of the cerebrum. So here you can see, recollect, this is the precentral gyrus, this is the post-central gyrus, this is the central sulcus, and this is the insula, and you can see occipital lobe, parietal lobe, cerebellum, temporal lobe, etc. Now let us see the organization of the white matter tracts of the left cerebral hemisphere. So there are different, the tracts are, white matter are arranged into different tracts called as the association tract, commissural tract, and the projection tract. They form white matter areas in the cerebral hemispheres. So they are important regions of the cerebral lobe. So you can see this is the cerebral cortex. The outer region is made up of cerebral cortex, which has many ups and downs. Ups and ups are called as the gyrus, and the downs are called as the grooves or sulci or sulcus. And you can see there are many tracts. This is the association tract, and this is the commissural and the projection tract. So commissural tract contain corpus callosum. This is the corpus callosum, hard white matter. This is the corpus callosum. So this is very important, and this is a septum pellucidum. So this region is called as the septum pellucidum. And again there is one more commissure called as the anterior commissure. Anterior commissure, and there are mammillary bodies. You can see the mammillary body here. So these are the different tracks. That is, our white matter tract are organized into different areas called as association tract, commissural tract, and the projection tract. So we will see them one by one. So cerebral white matter, they consist of axons. So the axons are myelinated axons. So they are very very important. They are myelinated axons, and there are three types of tracts present in the cerebral white matter. What are they? First one is the association tract. It contains axons that conduct nerve impulses between the gyri in the same hemisphere. So association tracts, they contain axons. Here you can see that will conduct the nerve impulses between the gyri in the same hemisphere. Next is the commissural tract. You can see they also contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from gyri in one cerebral hemisphere to the corresponding gyri in the other cerebral hemisphere. Say they make contact between the right and the left hemispheres. So commissural tract will contact, there is the gyri, the nerve impulses are transmitted from the gyri of one hemisphere to the corresponding gyri in the other cerebral hemisphere. So there are three important groups of commissural tract. So commissural tract are of three types. That is the corpus callosum, anterior commissure, and the posterior commissure. You can see here corpus callosum, anterior commissure is shown here, posterior commissure is not shown. There are three important commissural tract. So corpus callosum is the largest fiber bundle in the brain, containing about 300 million fibers. So this is a very very important region. The third one is the projection tract. So they contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from the cerebrum to the lower part of the central nervous system. So from the cerebrum, it transmits the nervous impulses to the thalamus, brainstem, or spinal cord, or from lower parts of the CNS to the cerebrum. So either from top to bottom or bottom to top. There is an internal capsule called as a thick band of white matter that contains both the ascending and the descending axons. So these are the different regions of the white matter, cerebral white matter. Now let us see about the basal ganglia. So what is the basal ganglia? So within each cerebral hemisphere, very much deep within the white matter, there are three nuclei. They are masses of gray matter. So the outermost covering is the cortex, which is made up of gray matter. The inner region is made up of white matter. What we have seen there, it contains many tracts: association tract, commissural tract, and the projection tract. And within the white matter, there are some masses of gray matter called as nuclei. Mainly, there are three nuclei. They are collectively called as the basal ganglion. So, they are collectively called as the basal ganglion or basal nuclei. Usually, ganglion means a collection of neuronal cell bodies outside the CNS. So, let us see about the basal ganglia. So here you can see the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia have projected to the surface and shown in purple color. So this is shown in purple color. The same is shown here. The purple colored ones are the basal ganglia. They are also shown in purple here in the B. So the basal ganglia help initiate and terminate movements, suppress unwanted movements, and regulate muscle tone. So that is the function of the basal ganglia. They help to initiate and terminate movements, and also suppress unwanted movements. So when this area gets affected, there will be a tremble in the body, and they also regulate the muscle tone. So when these areas get affected, all these muscular activities will also get affected. So that is what we are going to see here. And here you can see this is the lateral lobe, so lateral ventricle. This is the body of the caudate nucleus. This is the frontal lobe of the cerebrum. Putamen and head of the caudate nucleus. Head and tail of the head body of the caudate nucleus. There is a comma-like structure. Okay, then you have the tail of the caudate nucleus. See, it's a comma-like structure: head, body, and tail of the caudate nucleus, and you have the occipital lobe of the cerebrum. Here you can see these basal ganglions are called as corpus nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus. These three are together called as the corpus striatum. So these are the basal ganglion. What are they? Caudate nucleus. So caudate nucleus, it contains head, body, and tail. These are the head, body, and tail of the caudate nucleus. The second one is putamen. This is the largest one, and these are the smaller ones are called as the globus pallidus. So these three are together called as the corpus striatum. So same thing, they are present on the other side, a pair. And this is a region called as the insula. So this is the region called as the insula, and you can see the thalamus here. This is the subthalamic nucleus. Subthalamic nucleus, and you have some blue colored structures called as the hypothalamus and associated nuclei. And there is an internal capsule. Here there is a capsule like structure called as the internal capsule, and this is the septum pellucidum, you all know, through which the cerebrospinal fluid flows from the lateral ventricle to the third ventricle. This is the longitudinal fissure. So again, what are the basal ganglion? Two pairs of basal ganglion called as the caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidum. So they all together they are called as the corpus striatum. You have insula, subthalamic nuclei, thalamus and the subthalamic nuclei, hypothalamus associated nuclei, and the septal pellucidum. So two of the basal ganglia are side by side, that is just lateral to the thalamus. So you can see two of the ganglia are present lateral to the thalamus. So they are called as the globus pallidus. Two nuclei, you can see globus pallidus. Two, these two are called as the globus pallidus. That is, they are closer to the thalamus, and putamen is the other one, which is closer to the cerebral cortex. The next one is the putamen, which is closer to the cerebral cortex. Together, the globus pallidum and the putamen are referred as the lentiform nucleus. So only the globus pallidus and putamen together they are called as the lentiform nucleus. All together they are called as the corpus striate. So third basal ganglion is the caudate nucleus, which is a comma-shaped nucleus which contains the head, the body, and the tail. So together the lentiform and the caudate nuclei are called as the corpus striatum. So only the globus pallidus and putamen are called as the lentiform nucleus. Together with the caudate nucleus, it is called as the corpus striatum. So why it is called as corpus striatum? Because it is striated in appearance, and appearance of the internal capsule as it passes among the basal ganglia. So there are some structures which are present nearby, which are functionally linked to the basal ganglion. These structures are called as the substantia nigra of the midbrain. It is not shown here, only the subthalamic nucleus are shown. There are some structures called as the substantia nigra. See, you have to remember this. It is very, very important for the when this is absent or gets affected, it will lead to the muscular inactivity, or the tremble, which you can see in some of the neurological disorders. So it contains substantia nigra of the midbrain and the subthalamic nuclei. So the basal ganglia, they receive input from the cerebral cortex and provide output back to the motor areas of the cerebral cortex via neural connections with the nuclei of the thalamus. So they receive input from the cerebral cortex. Ganglia receive input from the cerebral cortex, and they give the output to the motor areas of the cerebral cortex through some neural connections which are present in the nuclei of the thalamus. So apart from this, it contains in addition, the nuclei of the basal ganglia have extensive connections with one another. So they have other connections also. So substantia nigra terminate in the caudate nucleus and putamen. The axons from the substantia nigra ends in the caudate nucleus and the putamen. What about the subthalamic nuclei? They interconnect with the globus pallidus. The function of the basal ganglion is to help initiate and terminate movements of the body. As I told you, if this area gets affected, that is the substantia nigra gets affected, it will lead to some disorders like the Parkinson's and the schizophrenia. The basal ganglia, they help to initiate and terminate movements of the body, start and end the body movements. It also suppresses unwanted movements when there is a shaking, trembling. No, you will not be able to hold the object. You will not be able to walk smoothly. So all this will get affected. Muscle tone will get affected. So, in addition, basal ganglia, they influence many aspects of the cortical. They also will lose the cognitive function also. Cognitive remembering certain things, knowledge, gaining knowledge, sensory, limbic, cognitive, and linguistic function. The difficulty in talking. All this will get affected if the basal ganglia gets affected. So, the dysfunction of the basal ganglia will lead to Parkinson's disease and the schizophrenia. Next, we will see the limbic system. So, what is the limbic system? The upper part of the brainstem, encircling the upper part of the brainstem and the corpus callosum, there is a ring of structures called as the limbic system. So, these structures are present in the inner border of the cerebrum and floor of the diencephalon. So, this is called as the limbic system or limbic border. What are the main components of the limbic system? The main components of the limbic system are limbic lobe. Limbic lobe. It is a rim of the outer one, cortex, the rim of the cerebral cortex on the medial surface of hemisphere. So they include, you can see, this is the components of the limbic systems and the surrounding structures. So here you can see this is the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, and this is the mam- mammillothalamic tract. This is the white matter, hard white matter called as the corpus callosum. And this one, this gyri is called as the cingulate gyri, which is present in the frontal lobe. So this is very important. And this is the anterior commissure. So we have studied about the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure. This is the anterior commissure, and this is the septal nuclei. This nuclei is called as the septal nuclei, and these are the mammary bodies in the hypothalamus. So these are the mammary bodies in the hypothalamus, and this is the olfactory bulb, and this is the amygdala. So this is called as the amygdala, and this is the parahippocampal gyrus. This is also a gyrus. The folded region is called as the gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus, and this one is called as the dental gyrus. This is called as the dental gyrus, and you can see the hippocampus. This is the hippocampus, and this is the terminalis. This is the medullaris. This is the fornix. So these are the different regions of the limbic system. They governs the emotional aspect of behavior. So they are very important. They govern the emotional aspect uh, of a person. So encircling the upper part of the brainstem and corpus callosum. So you can see it surrounds the corpus callosum and the upper part of the. There is a ring of structures. You can see all the things are in the form of a ring on the inner border of the cerebrum. You can see it is in the inner border of the cerebrum. All these are present in the inner border of the cerebrum and the floor of the diencephalon. So the limbic lobe is a rim of cerebral cortex on the medial surface of each hemisphere. So it includes the, as you have seen, cingulate gyrus, which lies above the corpus callosum. Cingulate gyrus, this you can see, this is present above the corpus callosum, and parahippocampal gyrus, which is in the temporal lobe. So parahippocampal gyrus, which is present in the temporal lobe. The hippocampus, it is a seahorse, is a portion of the parahippocampal gyrus that extends into the floor of the lateral ventricle. The hippocampus is not shown here. It is a part of the parahippocampal gyrus. Then you have the dentate gyrus. It lies between the hippocampus and the See, this is the dental gyrus. It lies between the parahippocampal gyrus and the hippocampal gyrus. So it is shown here. Next is the amygdala. So this is the amygdala. Amygdala is composed of several groups of neurons located close to the tail of the caudate nucleus. So, several groups of neurons lying close to the tail of the caudate nucleus. Then you have the septal nuclei. Septal nuclei, you can see here, septal nuclei. They are located within the septal area formed by the regions under the corpus callosum and the paraterminal gyrus. Then you have the mammillary bodies. You can see the uh, uh, mammillary bodies here in the hypothalamus. So they are present in the hypothalamus are two round masses close to the midline near the cerebral peduncles. Then there are two nuclei of thalamus, the anterior nuclei and the medial nuclei participate in the limbic circuits. So you can see the anterior nucleus of the thalamus, and the another one is the medial nuclei. The olfactory bulbs are present. They are flattened bodies of the olfactory pathway that rest on the cribriform plate. Then you have the fornix. You have seen the for this side. Fornix, stria medullaris, stria terminalis. So for fornix, stria terminalis, stria medullaris, medial forebrain bundle, and the mammillothalamic tract. They are linked bundles of interconnecting myelinated axons. So, what is the limbic system important for? The limbic system is important for, and it is called as the emotional brain. So, they are called as the emotional brain, and it plays a very important role in the emotions. That is like pain, pleasure, or docility. That is hostility, affection, and anger. So, the when the different regions are triggered, different kind of reactions can be, different extremes of reactions can be felt. It is also involved in smell, olfactory, and memory. So, certain experiments have shown that different areas of the animals in the limbic system can be simulated, and the animals can be made to react accordingly, whether they can experience either intense pain or extreme pleasure. So, the certain experiments have been conducted. Stimulation of these limbic system in the animals will produce some tameness, signs of affection, or if otherwise they can be very harsh or ferocious. So this can be done. So the caged animals can be experimented. So these different behaviors can be triggered either to extreme regions, either extreme harshness or ferociousness or extreme tameness. So together with the other parts of the cerebrum, the limbic system function in the memory. So when what happens when there is a damage to the limbic system, it causes memory loss or the memory impairment. One portion of the limbic system that is called as the hippocampus is very unique among the central nervous system. So this is very important portion of the brain and responsible for the memory, and also they develop neurons. So in the elderly, what happens? If this gets affected, it will affect in the memory power of the people. That is why people who are older in age, they cannot remember many things which was there in the past or younger years. Now we will see the functional organization of the cerebral cortex. So these functional areas of the cerebral cortex are divided into sensory, motor, and integrative signals. So these are processed in certain areas. So these sensory ascending tract, ascending neurons, motor are the descending neurons, and the integrative signals, both connecting the sensory and the motor neurons, are all processed in the cerebral cortex at a definitive regions. So these regions are called as the functional regions of the cerebral cortex. So they are the sensory areas. What do they do? They receive sensory information, and they are also involved in perception, understanding, and the conscious awareness of a sensation. Perception and conscious awareness of the sensation. The other one is the motor area. They control the voluntary movements of the body, and there are another area called as the association area. So they are more involved with the integrative functions. So integrative functions between the sensory and the motor neurons. Integrative functions are memory, emotions, reasoning. That is willingly doing something, judgment, personality traits, intelligence. So they're all associated with the association areas. So now we will see one by one. What is the sensory area? So sensory impulses or sensory information arrive from in the posterior half of both the cerebral hemisphere. So where do they receive the sensory information in the posterior half of the cerebral hemisphere, both the hemispheres, both the halves behind the central sulci. So this is the main region. In the cerebral cortex, primary sensory areas receive sensory information that has been given or relayed from the peripheral sensory receptors through lower regions of the brain. So, what are the different sensory areas? So, we will see that one by one. So, here in this picture, you can see these are the functional areas of the cerebrum. So, they are divided into many regions. You can see different colors are given. This is called as the primary motor area. This is called as the primary motor area, and this is called as the premotor area. This is the primary gustatory area, and this is the frontal eye field area. Many numbers are also given. Primary frontal eye field area, this is the frontal lobe, and you have this is a Broca's speech area. These are the Broca's speech area. You have the prefrontal cortex, and you can see the lateral cerebral sulcus here. This is the primary auditory area, and you can see auditory association area, and this is the temporal lobe, this is the occipital lobe, this is the primary visual area, this is the visual association area, this is the vernicles area. Different numbers are given for each and every area. This is the common integrative area, this is the somatosensory association area, and this is the primary somatosensory area. This is the central. So this is the somatosensory area, and this is the motor area. So we have seen in the previous slide that this is the precentral gyrus is involved in the motor area function, and the postcentral gyrus below the central sulcus is involved in the somatosensory area. So we will see this one by one. What is the first one? The primary somatosensory area. They are numbered as areas 1, 2, and 3. It is located directly posterior to the central sulcus of the cerebral hemisphere. That is, we have seen in the post-central gyrus below the central sulcus. So that is where it is located. So this area receives nerve impulses from the for touch, pressure, vibration, itch, tickle, temperature like cold and warm, pain, and proprioception. That is the joint and muscle position movement, and also involved in the perception of the somatic sensation. So where they are very important for these kind of functions like the impulse, touch, pressure, vibration, itch, tickle, etc. Next one is the primary visual area. So the primary visual area, where is it located? It is located in the area 17. So they are present at the posterior tip of the occipital lobe. You can see here, primary visual area. This is the primary visual area. That is the area 17. So they are at present at the posterior tip of the occipital lobe, mainly in the medial surface. So they are present in the medial surface, the next to the longitudinal fissure. So they are present next to the longitudinal fissure. They receive visual information and is involved in visual perception. That is the function of this primary visual area. Next is the primary auditory area, area 41 and 42. So where is the primary auditory area? This is the primary auditory area, green color 41 and 42. So they are very important. They are located in the superior part of the temporal lobe near the lateral cerebral sulcus. So what do they do? Auditory perception. They are very important for auditory perception. There is information regarding the sound. Next one is the primary gustatory area. That is the area 43. Area 43 is the primary gustatory area. Here you can see. So the gustatory means taste. So they are located at the base of the postcentral gyrus, superior to the lateral cerebral sulcus. They are involved in the impulses for taste, gustatory perception, and taste discrimination. They can identify what taste you are consuming. Next is the primary olfactory area. Area 28 is the primary olfactory area. Where is 28? 28 is not seen here. Okay. So it is located in the temporal lobe on the medial aspect, which receives impulses for the smell, olfactory perception. Next, we will see the motor area. So all these sensory areas are located in the left side. So this side, and the motor areas. The next is the motor areas. So the motor output from the cerebral cortex flows mainly from the anterior part of the each hemisphere. So the important ones are the primary motor area, that is area 4. This is the area 4. This is the primary motor area. It is located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. Each region in the primary motor area controls the voluntary contraction of specific muscles or groups of muscles. So, this is important for the voluntary control of muscles. Electrical stimulation of the primary motor area causes contraction of specific skeletal muscle on the opposite side of the body. That is very important. They control the opposite side of the body. Next is the Broca's or the speech area. It involves 45 and 40, 44 and 45. They are located in the frontal lobe close to the lateral cerebral sulcus. So from the name you can understand it is involved in the speech. So the speech area is localized in the left cerebral hemisphere. Next is the association area. So what is the association areas? The association areas of the cerebrum consist of large areas of the occipital, parietal and temporal lobes and the frontal lobes anterior to the motor area. So they are connected with one another by the association tract. So what are the association tract? They are the somatosensory association area, that is 5 and 7. So that's it is just posterior to and receives information from the primary somatosensory area as well as from the thalamus and the other part of the brain. So this area is very important in determining the when you hold an object, what is the shape of an object, what is the texture, what you feel. So that is done by this particular area. Another role is the storage of memory of the past experiences. That is another role of the sensory somatosensory area. Next is the visual association area. It is present in area 18 and 19. From the name itself, you can understand it is involved with the primary vision. Next is the facial recognizing recognition area. So you recognize different people on the based upon the face. So that is how you identify people. So this is present in the area 20, 21, and 37. Next is the auditory association area located in 22. This auditory means it will recognize a particular sound. You can identify who, without seeing a person, you can identify the which person is talking, and the song, the speech or music or noise. That Narendra Modi is talking, or P. Sushila is singing, or S.P. Balasubramanian is singing Yesudas. So you can identify the person who is speaking or singing or whatever it is. Next is the orbitofrontal cortex. So this is the area 11. So orbitofrontal. So this is primary impulses from the primary olfactory area. Receives some sensory impulses from the primary olfactory area. Next is the vernicles area. So this area is a broad region of the left temporal and the parietal lobes. So they are mainly connected with the speech recognition of the spoken words. So you understand some dialogue or something, that is because of the vernicles area. Next is the common integrative area, which is 5, 7, 39, and 40. So they integrate all the somatosensory, visual, and auditory association areas. So they are different types. That is the prefrontal cortex, premotor area, and the frontal eye field area. Prefrontal cortex is present in the areas 9, 10, 11, and 12. So they are well developed in the primates, especially humans. Next is the premotor area. It is associated with the area 6, and the neurons in this area communicate with the primary motor cortex. The sensory association areas in the parietal lobe, the basal ganglia, and the thalamus. Next is the frontal eye field area. So it is the eye, okay, vision controls the wall scanning movement of the eyes as you read a paper or a book or something. Okay, next is the hemisphere lateralization. So there is some lateralization in the hemisphere. So the brain is almost symmetrical. It has right and left hemisphere and different not anatomical structures. It is divided into many lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, etc. For example, in about two-thirds of the population, the planum temporal region of the temporal lobe includes the vernicle. 50% are larger on the left side than on the right side. So this asymmetry is seen in the fetus at about 30 weeks of gestation. So physiological differences also exist. That is, though the two hemispheres share performances of many functions, each hemisphere specializes in performing certain unique features. So this functional asymmetry is called as the hemispheric lateralization. Hemispheric lateralization. So brain waves. So what are brain waves? Brain waves are captured by the EEG, electroencephalogram. So brain neurons will generate millions of nerve impulses called as action potentials, and they are collectively called as the brain waves because they are electrical signals. So the brain wave generated by these neurons, they are especially generated by the cerebral cortex. They can be detected by sensors when you place some electrodes in the forehead. You can see just like the ECG, they place some electrode in the forehead, and they record the different waves, sound waves. Okay, that is called as the EEG or the electroencephalogram. So this electroencephalogram is used for studying whether the person's brain is functioning normally, or there is some abnormal change. Okay, whether there is a change that is different from the sleep, and in diagnosing various brain disorder, neurological disorders, epilepsy, tumors, trauma, hematoma, metabolic abnormalities, degenerative diseases, Parkinson's, Alzheimer, all these kind of cases, the EEG is used to study the difference between the normal brain and the abnormal brain. So there are different patterns produced by the brain neurons. So they are only recorded in the EEG. So the waves like alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves are recorded in the electroencephalogram. So what are alpha waves? They are rhythmic waves which occur at a frequency of about 8 to 3 cycles per second. That is, the frequency is expressed in the form of hertz. 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. So hertz. So it is 8 to 13 cycles per second. So they are present in all the EEG normal individuals when they are awake and resting with their closed eyes. So they disappear during sleep. This is the alpha waves. When a person is awake and resting without any movement, these waves can be recorded, but it is not present in the sleep. Next is the beta wave. The frequency is 14 to 30 hertz. So when do they appear? They appear when the nervous system is active. That is during periods of sensory input and the mental activity. When you are doing some math calculation or thinking about something, different images come into your mind. So that is beta waves are active. Theta waves have frequencies of 4 to 7 hertz, and they normally occur in children and adults experiencing some emotional stress. So schizophrenia, some kind of bipolar disorders, so these can be experienced, and it will tell you that whether the person is normal or he is suffering from some brain disorder. Next is the delta wave. The frequency is 1 to 5 hertz. So this occur during sleep, deep sleep in the adults, but they are normal in awake infants. So, when produced by an awake adult, they indicate brain damage. The delta waves are usually seen when a person, adult, is sleeping, having a deep sleep. But when they are seen in a person who is awake, then it indicates brain damage. So, these are different types of brain waves recorded in the EEG. Electrical activity this is alpha, beta, theta, and delta. This is 1 hertz. Cycles. Okay, this is all about the cerebrum, cerebral hemisphere, and the different areas associated with the cerebrum. Thank you for listening.